Welcome to the Museum of Aquarium and Pet History. Today we have an icon in the reptile industry. We have a Mr. Paul Benson, who's been in the reptile trade for over 60 years. And not just reptiles, the guy is a chemist, a computer scientist, he is a rocket engineer, he worked on the Apollo 11 spaceship program. So the guy is multi-versatile in what he does in life, and he has a very interesting story to tell about his life, which is fascinating. In fact, I've never had anyone give me an outline, and he's given me an outline as to his life, which is fascinating. So, without further ado, Mr. Paul Benson.
I said a second ago, people have often wanted to mute me, but found it very difficult. You had a wonderful opportunity there, very rare.
I have to tell you, when you called today, I was stressed out because I was getting ready for this interview, and I thought, no, I know how Paul is. He's the kind of guy that doesn't tell you what time it is, he tells you how the watch works. So I can't take the call right now.
I just want to, like I said, in my last email 15 minutes ago to you, as I reread this outline, and then I think of other things to add to it. Mm-hmm. And I printed it out. It's damn long. I can't believe that I did all this crap.
Well, I gave you a nice little interview, or a nice little plug in the beginning here, and I told them that I never had anyone give me an outline. And I said, because you're a computer scientist, it makes complete sense that you're analytical and you would document it all. That's so cool.
Well, also the one thing you learned in the computer industry, if you were giving a proposal, whatever, you never went in unprepared, because you were dealing with very smart people, and they knew BS. And you didn't write something once before you showed it to them. You wrote it about 15 times because you didn't want it. In any industry, including the pet industry, your reputation is gold. And if you blow it, it takes you forever to regain it.
Yeah, if you can. That's very true. So let's start in the beginning, Paul, because I know this is going to go long. So before 1962, when you were just a little kid, were you into reptiles? Was your dad into reptiles? Your family into animals?
I was afraid of snakes.
Really?
Yeah, even when I first started riding the motorcycle, I was afraid of snakes.
That's crazy.
Friends, some of my friends rode motorcycles, and some of their friends collected reptiles. And so, and one thing I haven't even touched on in this, which just occurred to me, is the trips to Mexico and the trips to Arizona and such. But I would go out collecting initially, and they would pick the crap up. I would point it out, but I wouldn't, especially rattlesnakes. So one afternoon, I decided that I had to grow some huevos and go out there and do it myself. And like any unlucky thing that would happen, the first snake I came across was a newborn rattlesnake, which is only like 8 to 12 inches long. They're the hardest rattlesnake to pick up because they're so tiny. And try and pinch behind the head. And I did it. But it was like, why can't you give me just a normal size snake? But no, it took me a while. The main thing that, herpetology and reptiles, one person described once, it's more of an addiction than a hobby. Once you get attracted to them and you start noticing the variety in form and the oddities, chameleons on the front foot have 3 fingers on the outside and 2 on the inside. But on the rear feet, they have 3 on the inside and 2 on the outside. Both possibilities. And so you start seeing all this, and the color variation. Right now there's over 350 some or more various color morphs of corn snakes.
There's insane.
15 different genes that they found, and they've actually, are probably finding more. It's probably one of the most documented snakes, And ball pythons the same. You know, the sad thing is nobody's really put that effort into bearded dragons. You know, they'll name a
Yeah.
new morph, but they have no idea how they got it.
Right.
Not a clue to the genetics. And, you know, when you start identifying the genes, then you can do intelligent selective breeding, not just haphazard and random selective breeding.
Right.
And so you can plan for things, or you can hope to get something. You know, the last, just before we shut down Animal Specialties, we developed what I call a pied bearded dragon, and it would have random white spots on it. And it turned out to be from breeding translucents with stripes.
All right, let's jump to 1965. You became a lab assistant intern to Dr. James Peters, who was a biology professor at Cal State Northridge. And the significance of him was he was the secretary for the Society of Ichthyology and Herpetology, and which meant he had all the herpetologists, the mailing list of all of them in the world. So you decided you wanted African rock pythons. He gave you a name, which was Dr. Leakey, the famous anthropologist. And you wrote him in Nairobi, Kenya. He wrote you back and says, talk to my son, Jonathan. You wrote Jonathan, and he became a collector for you. And
yeah, Jonathan was starting a business, apparently.
Yeah, he gave you open account, which is unheard of now.
I mean, this is the crazy thing. He gave me 30-day terms.
I know. That
and
never
Pan
happens.
Am took the shipment COD.
That's crazy.
So I brought the shipment in literally with no money in the bank. I mean, you know, I'm a college student. How much money do you have, right?
Right.
And I drove. Hermosa Reptile was 10 miles away from LA Airport.
Uh-huh.
So I got the shipment, cleared it. Took a long time because the customs guy didn't like reptile. So he called he even called county health trying to get the shipment banned. Got the animals in, went to Hermosa Reptile, sold them, deposited the money in the bank to cover the check that I wrote to Pan Am. But, you know, minimum wage was $1 an hour, $40 a week. And I netted $2,000 for 2 hours work.
That's
now,
amazing.
Maybe more from writing the letters or whatever. And the downside to that kind of a thing is you couldn't do it every day, right? Because you had to wait for the one person to sell them through. And then you had collecting seasons. So you had to have different exporters to cover you during the summer or cover you in the fall or cover you in winter. So you wound up importing from Africa, and then you would import from South Africa because it was in the southern hemisphere. So its summer was our winter. And you would import from Malaysia. You know, Thailand wasn't doing very much at that time. It was mostly Malaysia. And you would import from Colombia. One of the dealers in Colombia, Mike Salakis, turned out to be a CIA plant. And he was using reptile exporting as his cover. Yeah, the reptile industry is totally insane at times. You know, Ray Folsom would go down to South America in the summer to pick out animals and bring back a large shipment. And he flew a plane from Peru to Colombia with a 4x8 sheet of plywood strapped over the hole in the wing. Yeah, you know, so you hear all these things and then you go and see them yourself, where you wind up, you know, we would go to Mexico in the mid 60s and buy green iguanas for a peso, which was a quarter.
Yeah.
And bring them back up to Los Angeles and sell them for $1 or $2. So if you brought back a couple of hundred green iguanas, it paid for the trip. I remember gas was a quarter a gallon. I could go to Tucson, Arizona for a weekend with food and motel and gas for $20.
That's amazing.
It was $5 for gas.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's insane.
Now, when you said Ray Folsom, that was with the Hermosa Reptile, correct?
Right. Yeah, Ray owned Hermosa Reptile. In the 1960s, it was a small one-unit retail store. When I managed it, he had 3 units built
Crazy.
together. It was a large, he had grown. But, again, he made probably half of his income in the spring selling baby raccoons and baby fox that he bought from Wisconsin and Minnesota.
That's
Which
incredible.
you can't do anymore.
No. So Animal Specialties was before you went to work for Ray Folsom as manager.
Right.
And that was
and Worldwide Animal Sales was also before I went to work.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, and you had that business going for a while, and then you went to work. Let's see. When you had Animal Specialties, there was basically Hermosa Reptile, Western Zoo. I'm thinking there was the Shed, there was East Bay Vivarium, Twin Cities. That was about it, right? There wasn't very many people that was doing the animal game.
There was a large animal business, and I mean large in that they sold rhinos and elephant stuff. Animal business. It was international something or another in I believe Texas. It was Indiana.
Oh, okay.
And there wasn't anything in Florida. I mean, Bill Haas, the Mammoth Serpentarium, but that was more of a mini zoo and show than live animal import and export. There were a lot of tropical fish dealers in Florida because the tropical fish came up from Colombia and it was closer to ship to Florida. And Florida had the proper climate. They had outdoor ponds. They had pools that were maybe 2 feet deep and an acre in size.
So I want to get this straight now. So you went to work for the LA Zoo, or actually you sold the LA Zoo when they opened up in '66. They basically bought you out of all your reptiles on your price list for their reptile exhibit. And then you went to work for them for 3 months in the bird department and 3 months in the reptile department. And then you quit to go back to work for Rocketdyne. Is that right? The firm that made rocket engines for most of the American missiles at the time?
Yes.
And the Apollo Saturn V rocket?
Yeah, I applied at Rocketdyne several times because I didn't have a degree at that time. And I finally got hired in within Rocketdyne. There were a bunch of subdivisions. And I got hired to work what was referred to as Santa Susana, which is the mountain range between the San Fernando Valley and the Simi Valley. And that's where they tested all of their engines. I mean, it occupied probably 100 square miles. They had their own little bus system to drive you around through it and such. And for the first month or so, I worked analyzing rocket fuels and oxidizers because for what was referred to as a static test, where they bolt the engine down and test it, the fuels had to be 99% pure for that to be a valid test. So every time they did a test, you would get samples of this stuff and you would test it for its quality. And then I went down to what was referred to as the main division in Canoga Park and worked with a mass spectrometer and a PhD chemist who worked on the mass spectrometer, analyzing the various components of the Apollo 1 that burned out because they were trying to blame it on something. I mean, it burned up because it was 100% oxygen atmosphere, which is, you can burn steel wool in 100% oxygen atmosphere. It's crazy. It should never have been that way. But most of the accidents in the space program have been because some bureaucrat didn't listen to an engineer. Yeah. The engineer said, don't do this. The bureaucrat says, oh, but we got a timeline. We've got to do it. And then the Challenger blows up. Right.
I could think of things today that probably mirror the same thing that you just said, but I won't mention any companies because I don't want to get myself in trouble. But there's obviously
the thing
kind of the same thing going on out there.
Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, bureaucrats, not the elected people, but bureaucrats, the ones who have these lifetime jobs because it's nepotism or whatever, you know, they just don't keep up. I mean, like me, my degree in biology is over 55 years old, and it's worthless now because of all of the changes, because of DNA, all of the taxonomy. I used to know the scientific names of 99% of the reptiles in the world. You know, an example is, again, rat snakes or corn snakes. Rat snakes, the genus is Elaphae, and it used to be the genus. The rat snakes in Europe had the genus Elaphae. The rat snakes in Asia had the genus Elaphae. The rat snakes in South America, the rat snakes in North America. Well, obviously that's wrong. So once DNA came into play, they now have a couple of dozen different genera for these. Archaeoelaphae, Proteoelaphae, etc. And so all the knowledge you had is useless.
Yeah.
You know, imagine being a medical doctor. Those guys have to literally go back to school every 3 months.
We hope.
What a pain in the butt.
All right. So after you worked on Apollo 11, they had a major layoff at the end of 1969. 17,000 chemists were unemployed in Los Angeles. So you decided to take a left turn and open a reptile shop in the San Fernando Valley called Worldwide Animal Sales and Products. And
yeah,
so
I always had great thoughts with names.
I know. I won't talk about the acronym, but it's there. So yeah, you didn't talk much about the shop because you did that for a while, and then in '72 you got offered a position as an analytical chemist at Lambert K, which is a big dog and cat manufacturer, a Linatone.
Still is.
I know, exactly. And you know what interesting about that, Paul, is I found some vintage Lambert K turtle products, and it just surprised me. I go, when did Lambert K make reptile products? So now I know that's from you. You're the one that got them into making those reptile.
Again, you know, imagine the audacity. I apply for this job because I need employment. I mean, I closed Worldwide Animal Sales and Products because of the '71 earthquake.
Okay.
All the stores in the San Fernando Valley that were on east-west facing streets, their windows blew out. All of them. And all the stores that were on north-south. Now mine was on a north-south street. The windows held because they were going along the strength of it. But all the cages in the building collapsed and stuff. So I lost a lot of investment in it. And insurance, you have to have earthquake insurance,
which nobody has.
Yeah, and business insurance is weird. You get fire insurance for your house, it covers smoke damage. You have fire insurance for your business, it doesn't cover smoke damage.
That's
the
crazy.
Dentists and the doctors in Paradise whose property survived lost all of their equipment because of smoke damage. And it wasn't insured. You have to have smoke insurance. Yeah, think about that, Gary. You know, I mean, it's like the Katrina hurricane in Louisiana. It doesn't cover flooding. It's a damn hurricane. You get flooding. No, you got to have flood insurance.
I had a fire. I'm just going to interject for a minute. I had a fire that destroyed one of my buildings back in the early days of California Zoo Supply. Actually, it was ZooMed. It's like one of our first buildings at ZooMed, and we were across from Cal Zoo in an industrial building, and a fire burned the thing to the ground. So the insurance company shows up, and I had a $50,000 policy, and he asked me, he goes, "How much did you lose?" And I said, easily $100,000. And how much do you need? And I said, well, I probably need at least, $10,000, $15,000 to get back on my feet, get going again. So I knew nothing about insurance. And what I just found out, I got schooled real fast. They gave me the $10,000 or $15,000 to get back on my feet, but the $50,000 policy automatically became $25,000 because I was the co-insurer. if I had 100,000 and I didn't insure for 100,000, and I told them that I had 100,000 loss, I'm the co-insurer. So then that 50 that they did is only worth 25. So I
Right.
learned I was schooled real fast about insurance companies.
Yeah, I had a similar thing happen with Animal Specialties in the building we had before we purchased our warehouse. We wound up it grew in increments, so we wound up renting almost every building from one end of the block to the other. We had like 7 buildings. And one of them, some of them were pretty old because they were within the fraternity area of the university. And one of the brand new lights I had bought caught fire and it burned a rack of cages. And I lost some animals there, but the major problem I had was smoke damage, inhalation for the animals that were in that one room. And luckily we had them in a bunch of different rooms. It was only a small population. And so the insurance guy, again, you learn about insurance. He asked me how much they were worth. And I said, well, the breeders are worth so-and-so. And he goes, well, are the breeders for sale? And I said, well, no. And he goes, well, then they're not covered. Only animals that are for sale are covered. I said, well, then they're for sale. I said, hell, I'll sell my mother. I mean, excuse me. So then he asked how much they were worth. And I said, well, from $100 to $700. And he says, well, can you document that? So I printed out a bunch of the king snake ads. And I got $700 a piece for the ones that died. But just like you, only 50% could I claim. Because yes, if you don't insure what you declare as the full value, then you're a co-insurer, which it makes sense when they explain it to you. But you want to kick your agent in the ass and say, why didn't you explain that to me?
Exactly, because I never heard that until I had a fire and learned the hard way, basically. All right, let's talk about Hermosa Reptile. 1972. They needed a new manager. You knew Ray Folsom since 1965. He hired you, and you... At that time, and actually I remember going into Hermosa Reptile when I was a little kid. We used to go around, my Fish Geek buddies, we would on the weekend go around to fish stores, and we wound up in that area because I know the coastal area had a bunch of fish stores, and I remember that store had all those wild paintings on the wall, right? It was kind of weirdly artistic.
Oh, we also had a big tank with gar in it and stuff, which are prohibited in California, but he had a permit to have them. I mean, this was probably like 1,000-gallon tank or something, because it was at least 12 foot wide by 3 foot tall. And then he had some window cages, and again, the window cages, we would feed live baby chicks on Wednesday nights. And we would put newsprint up on the inside of the cage so nobody could see. And every now and then you'd get some little old lady who would literally put a ladder up outside to look over it and then complain that we were feeding these live animals where the public could see. And Ray had a good relationship with the Hermosa Police Department, so it was always ignored. But you just go, guys, you're going out of your way to be a real pain in the butt. But I'm sure with running a retail business, this is what you run into.
Yeah, it's tough.
I mean, the worst side of human nature.
Yeah. So tell me the king cobra story, because I've never forgotten that. You told it to me years ago. I've never forgotten it.
Well, again, we were making the movie, which I have the poster sitting behind me, and we brought in about 5 big 15-foot king cobras for the movie. Ray was in the movie mimicking Bill Hass, the mammoth serpentarian, where he was, going to milk the king cobra in front of a crowd and stuff. And I was his assistant. I was in drag because the assistant was supposed to be a girl, so I had a wig and lab coat on. And when
Are
Ray
you in the
went to
film?
put the snake in, this is one of the incidents, when Ray went to put the snake in the jar, he missed my thumb by about 1/8 of an inch.
So you were in the film then?
I was in the film, yes,
As a
yes.
woman.
But and as a result, I was I was given a Screen Actors Guild temporary card, and I got residuals and all of the other stuff with it.
Uh-huh.
But you know, several funny stories. One, these king cobras were supposed to come out of the building through an outdoor ramp, and then Ray was supposed to freehand grab them behind the head and milk them. And for 2 days, the cobras came out, and there was a chain link fence, and they had a crowd of extras around. And the cobras would just try to get out. They didn't hood, they didn't do anything. We just had a pulling them back. And you know, everybody kind of lost interest. They were just hemming and hawing and rolling around. And the cameraman, the camera was buried so that he had the height, you know, ground about 3 foot level to see. One day, the cobra decided to hood, and it came up at about 6 foot. This is a 15-foot cobra. Came up at about 6 foot, went straight for the camera, went over the plexiglass top of the camera and out of the enclosure into the audience.
Oh my God.
Everybody exploded because this is on the outside lot at Universal Studios. Everybody exploded and ran into the hills. They had to stop shooting till the next day. Nobody came back. Cameraman just goes, I almost died.
No,
what you're talking about is at Hermosa, these snakes were kept in a cage that was meant for tree snakes, not so it was 3 foot wide, 3 foot tall, but only a foot deep. And you're putting a 15-foot snake in this thing. So it just bowed its back, and because the back was just stapled on, and popped the back of the cage out.
Oh
so Jaron Lucas, who was one of the workers there and a friend, the venomous room was double entry.
Yeah, hot room.
As a requirement. So you'd walk in one door, close it, and you'd walk in the other door. We walked in the other door and walked into the room, and we turn around, and here's this 15-foot cobra draped over the door. We just walked under it. You know, I mean, it's 15 foot. You got 3 foot. You still have 6 foot on each side hanging down. And Jaron goes, well, let's go back out and you know, get somebody to help us. And I said, Jaron, first of all, to go back out, we got to walk under the snake. I said, secondly, if we go back out, I'm coming back with a hand grenade, and that's it. I'm not going back in the room with the loose king cobra. So we had snake tongs and stuff in the room. So we lifted the snake up. We didn't want to grab it, but cobras are pretty docile. So you can lift them up like a viper with a snake hook. So we both lifted him up because he's 15 foot in size. And when we had opened up an empty cage, and we put his head in the cage and coaxed him to crawl into the cage. And then we went back out, and we went over to Ray and said, I think we need better cages for the cobras. I mean, a little bit of a heads up on this one.
I'm surprised you didn't tell him I need a lunch break.
That's it. Yeah. Oh, it was one of those things where the adrenaline was, you didn't need coffee for a while.
Yeah, no kidding. God. All right. So, and you left Hermosa Reptile in the spring of 1974 due to a downturn in the reptile business, which is interesting because I got into it in 1977. And I remember all the old timers from the 60s telling me, why are you getting into reptiles? They passed all these new laws now. It's too hard to get animals. You're crazy. You're out of your mind. And which I thought was interesting because I never listened. And
see, you had a different market. You have to remember, Ray did the wholesale.
Right.
He sold out-the-door retail. And like I said, during the summer, I mean, he would go into $40,000 in debt in 1960s and 70s money in the winter.
Jeez.
You know, the bank would just keep putting money in his account. And then in the spring, he would sell raccoons and fox and build it back up. But most of the exotic sales, and I mean, and Ray sold elephants and other things too. You know, we had an incident where a baby elephant went through the floor of a Pan Am jet, and Ray had to fly to Hawaii to try and figure out how to get the elephant out of the floor of a jet.
Oh my gosh.
We had another incident where a 6-foot water monitor got out of a cage, and we knew it got out of the cage because it was on the invoice and the cage was empty, but we didn't know where it was.
Huh.
And they found it 2 days later in the Pan Am jet in Turkey. And Ray had to fly to Turkey to help get that out of the jet. Yeah, luckily it wasn't a king cobra, you know. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, the various little things. I had a 14-foot python in my house when I was working at Rocketdyne, and it got out. And my roommate called me up at Rocketdyne and said, "Susie's loose. She's in the rafters of the garage. What should I do?" I said, "Close the door and I'll be home later." 14 foot. Leave her the hell alone.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, Susie had fun. One time, Rick Corn owned Susie. This is before Animal Specialties, and she was in a cage on a workbench in the garage, and it was a top opening cage, front glass, but a top opening cage.
Uh-huh.
And to get Susie out, you would wave a towel, and she would bite the towel and constrict around it. And then you could big her out in this big monster 70-pound ball and clean the cage and then put her back in it. I mean, she was a good snake, but she was just big. Well,
Yeah.
one time it missed the towel and it bit. Rick's standing on a ladder to reach over the top of this cage. It missed the towel and grabbed Rick's arm. So Rick's trying to get it off of his arm. He puts his knee through the front of the cage, which breaks the glass. So he's blood streaming down his arm, blood streaming down his leg.
Oh my
And
god.
his insurance agent walks up the driveway. "You want more life insurance?" Yeah, you know, things happen at just the wrong time sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they tell you, like, big snakes always be like scuba diving. You always have a buddy system. You
Yep.
got to have somebody else there with you if you're going to handle a big snake.
Yeah, well, Susie, one time I was showing her to a pet shop, and I had a hold of her head and she wrapped around my body. So now my hands are pinned that are holding her head. So I can't let go of her, but I can't get my hands loose to unwrap her. So I had to ask, you know, the guy that owned the shop, who was a friend, I said, "Grab her tail and pull." And he did. And I just unwound, just spun around and unwound her. I said, "Thanks." You know?
You didn't buy that snake, right?
Yeah. Well, again, one of the things that I recently added to that list, when I worked at the LA Zoo, the LA Zoo was brand new. It had just been built. The old Griffith Park Zoo was actually condemned by the Humane Society. And they had a large triangular cage or trapezoidal cage at the end of 2 rows of cages. So it had 3 sides of glass and then 1 side of wood and 1 side with the door to go in. And it had a pond and everything else. And this was for a 17-foot retic. But part of the copper tubing that went into the cage to heat it was exposed where it went into the concrete in the pond. And it was being fed with live steam. So the snake got burned on several spots on its venter. So in most cases with burns with the animals, the vet would give you a salve and you'd rub on the burn, and it was soothing and it was medicated. So he gives us this cosmetic jar of salve and tells us to apply it to the snake. So the zoo opened to the public at 10 o'clock, but we started to work at 8, and because we were supposed to do all the cleaning before the public got in. So about 9:30 or so, we go in to put salve on the snake. About 3 minutes into it, we realize you don't put greasy salve on a snake. So there's 5 of us trying to hold on to this body, and it makes a greased pig look easy to hold on to. And it's writhing back and forth, it's pulling loose. We're running all around the cage grabbing it. we kept doing it long enough where the zoo opened. We had a crowd out there watching us, about 6 people deep. Finally, after 20 minutes, we got it, got loose of it, threw it back in the cage, and exited quickly through the door to a round of a huge amount of applause. So we sent a note up to the vet, make a note, don't put grease on a snake.
So in '79, you started, which really was the first dry good manufacturer that had a full range of reptile products.
Yep.
And 1979. And that's pretty amazing because I remember, of course, those days. And I think I bought your products when I had Cal Zoo before.
I saw you at Cal Zoo once a week delivering stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't realize you were that young. I mean, I'm 80. What are you, 65 or something?
66.
Yeah, see, I didn't realize you were 14 years younger than me. I gave you more credit. You were doing pretty good. But, to be honest, the one thing that I've always valued in you as a friend and as a business is you're consistent, you're reliable. It's what made Cal Zoo. You were there every week. Most reptile guys were there when they got a shipment, and then you didn't see them for a month or two.
No, I still work 7 days a week. I go in almost every day. I try to take Wednesdays off, but I wind up going in because my wife doesn't want me home.
It pays off. Well, again, it's one of those things. I mean, I may have shut down Animal Specialties, and now I'm back to focusing on Nature Zone. But, I don't have to go in all the time, but I do, and my wife Fern will stay home. You want to go in today? Oh, I don't have anything to do. No, I said, okay. But it's just, I guess, I mean,
it's in your blood.
Well, it's always been fun.
Yeah.
I 10 years ago, I had some surgery with discs in my neck that had disintegrated. I used to joke that my surgeon liked me so much he cut my throat. But I went in to the neurosurgeon for the first visit, and then, in the middle of the interview, he goes, well, do you work? And I said, no. And he said, well, can you come in next Wednesday at 10 o'clock? I said, well, I misspoke. I have to be someplace from 8 to 5, but I don't work. I just play, and I've always considered myself to be a spoiled brat. I've done throughout most of my life what I've enjoyed. On occasion, I've had to go out and learn how to lay carpeting, but I found out that wasn't that bad. That was actually good for me. It taught me respect for the trades. Construction workers aren't stupid, or the damn house would fall down.
That's true.
So you have to have a certain amount of respect for whoever does anything. Even the cobbler who used to make shoes. He had to know how to do that damn stuff, guy. It wasn't just putting 2 pieces of leather and magically having a shoe.
Yeah, we're losing a lot of the trades. It's kind of a shame.
That's the sad part. Our schools don't teach trades, which is ridiculous. And our schools don't teach capitalism. They may teach how to balance a checkbook.
Right.
But I mean, even my mother, who was a smart woman, when my orders with Petco doubled, and she goes, "Oh, you're going to make twice as much money." I said, "No, Mom, I have to spend twice as much money. You got to make the damn product before you get paid for it. You got to invest in the raw materials. You got to invest in the labor. You got to invest in the packaging. You got to invest in the shipping. That's called capital. If you double your business and you don't have capital, you go out of business. You can't do it." And I'm sure you've known this from growing your business. There's times where you look at things. I mean, I was offered a contract early on with Walmart that I turned down. I said, I can't afford to do you. I just can't.
Yeah, you lose money.
Yeah. Lots of money.
We had an order from Disney one time at ZoomEd, and I couldn't deliver. And she called me up, the buyer, and said, "You are one of the worst vendors I've ever had in my life." And I told her, I said, "I totally agree with you." And it blew her away that I said that. She goes, "I totally agree." And she goes, "Well, why do you say that?" And I said, my sales rep sold you these at basically below our cost. I couldn't afford to make them for you. I really couldn't. And he made a mistake, and I'm don't want to go out of business. So that's why I turned down the PO, or why I didn't ship. So that happens in business.
Well, again,
Sometimes.
there are times where the smart decision may be the hard one, but to
Right.
turn away business if you can't afford it is smart.
That's right. That's
I mean,
exactly right.
that's why you're still in business. That's why I'm still doing things. There's a certain level where you understand what capitalism is. And again, with Animal Specialties, all my employees thought, oh, you're making so much money. You're so filthy rich, blah, blah, blah. I had one employee who would come in late, take an extra half hour at lunch, go home early, but bitched he wasn't getting paid enough and wanted a raise. I pointed out to him if he worked a full day, it'd be like getting a $3 an hour raise. And then when my house burned in paradise, he told me, well, you have all the insurance money, you can give me a raise. And I looked at him, I said, are you serious? I mean, the audacity. But again, people don't understand money. And in our society, you have to.
Tanzania. You decided to contact the Tanzanian government to reestablish the animal export business.
Yeah, Tanzania at the time, the chief officer, president, or whatever he was, Nyerere, was the father of socialism in Africa. And so when he became in charge of the government, he socialized everything. And so like Carr Hartley, which the movie Hatari was based on, was situated out of Arusha, and they socialized the business and basically destroyed it. And so all they had going for them animal-wise was hunting. And big game hunters would come, and they were not nickel and dime, they were $1,000 to death. It was $5,000 for an elephant's tail and $10,000 for a foot and X number of thousand for this and for that, to where to go on safari, it would cost you $300,000 or $400,000. So you were getting doctors out of Texas, et cetera, going on these safaris, but they had no money. I mean, it took the country 5 years to get a $200,000 loan. I could borrow more money than the entire country of Tanzania.
That's crazy.
Which was insane. So after corresponding with him, because we used to get really beautiful chameleons, Jackson's chameleons, out of Whitley in Tanzania. They were big, they were healthy, and everything else. And he shut down. So they invited me to come over, and I worked with the head of the Department of Interior and Forestry to help them set up export. And there's now, I believe he's a Californian, but there's an American who has a company over there now who exports and such. But at the time, there was nobody doing it. And one of the interesting thing was they were thinking of paying the kids at the schools for the chameleons. But a kid would only bring in one chameleon at a time because they were afraid of them. So they'd bring him in on a stick. And as the chameleon walked towards the kid, they would flip the stick around. So they were constantly flipping the stick while they brought the chameleon into the school to be put in a communal cage. Because one of the folklore myths is that chameleons are responsible for death. God told the chameleon to tell man about death, but the chameleon walked so slow, man didn't learn about death until it was too late. So they're all totally afraid of chameleons.
In some of the villages in Tanzania.
The superstition, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was interesting being over there. I went out to a safari with the head of the Department of Interior, and on the way back, he stopped and bought a bushel bag of charcoal, burlap bag of charcoal. That was his perk. This is like a cabinet member, and his perk is to get a bag of charcoal.
Oh, wow.
The Ford dealership had no parts on the wall because they couldn't get them. The black market was in money because you got 7 times your value for the American dollar than the official trade, because they couldn't use the Tanzania shilling in Kenya, but they could use the British pound or the American dollar.
Wow.
So you'd walk down the street and you'd hear out of doorways, change, man, change. All these guys trying to get your money. And when you came into the country, I mean, it was like the movie Raid on Entebbe. We landed in Arusha, or at Kilimanjaro Airport, rather, at about 2 in the morning. And the airport offices were closed. We go down the steps of the airplane to the tarmac. They have folding tables set up where you're supposed to empty all your pockets and declare your cash. They have big floodlights on tripods sitting there, and the military behind them. And you're saying, what the hell have I gotten myself into? And what had happened was, the week before I came to Tanzania, Tanzania had invaded Uganda to get rid of Idi Amin. And the jumping off point for the army was Arusha, the city I was going to visit. So there was military everywhere. And I was going, yeah, I mean, it was strange. I flew there when Israel had just gone into Lebanon. So we couldn't fly over Israel. So the British Airways flew all the way around Turkey and landed in Jordan. But we landed right after Yasser Arafat left Lebanon and landed in Jordan. So the entire airport is, you got 16 and 17-year-olds with automatic weapons everywhere. And again, I'm saying to myself, why am I here? Then I went to Baghdad, then we went to Mecca, and Tanzania didn't have any fuel. So the airplane had to fly out of Tanzania back to Saudi Arabia to get fuel. But because of the Muslim religion and alcohol, they told you, hide all your little alcohol bottles and stuff until we leave Saudi Arabia. Because if they find any alcohol, you'll be here for 3 months. They'll impound the airplane.
Wow.
So yeah, why am I here? You see all the news about the Middle East, and I expected just to fly to Tanzania from London, not to have all this diversion.
So you wanted to go to Mozambique, apparently for reptiles, but you decided not a good idea because they told you they couldn't promise you a return ticket.
Well, I was skeptical to begin. The Mozambique government, like Tanzania, asked me to come, and at that time, now they're a different government, a different political system. They were Marxist communists at that time, like North Korea. And matter of fact, 2 weeks before I left, they had arrested 2 Americans, as the only 2 Americans in country, as spies. But they had asked me to come, and I had a letter of invitation. So yeah, I get in Tanzania, and I call up the airport to make a reservation, like you do normally, to fly to Mozambique. And they say, well, we don't take reservations. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, because we're never sure when there's a flight going to take off. They're sporadic. So when there's a flight, we'll contact your hotel and they'll let you know. I said, okay, so what's a round trip ticket cost? They said, well, we don't sell round trip tickets because we don't know when the plane's coming back. So I said, I'm not going. If you don't know when you're going to be able to leave a country, it's not when you should enter it.
So you pivoted to Nature Zone, and then Nature Zone, you had a sister company. You thought, if I'm going to make dry goods, I need to have the supply of live animals. So you started Animal Specialties back up, and you started breeding bearded dragons by the bazillions.
Yes. Well, what happened too we did not sell dragons for about 5 years because I just kept building the colony, raising the babies up and breeding them, and raising the babies up and breeding them. And Nature Zone backed that business. It funded the whole growth of it. It funded the move into the building. I mean, I had a sweetheart move with a freight company. I had all of these cages to move, and the cages aren't small. They're like 2 or 3 cubic feet. They're 17 inches wide, 15 inches tall, and 30 inches deep. And they don't collapse. So I moved over a period from where it was on that one block to the warehouses that we bought over a 3-month period. I moved a container, a 24-foot container every week. The trucking company would drop the container off. We would fill it. They would pick it up and move it across town, 10 miles, drop it off. We would empty it. They would bring it back. $75. Yeah, $75.
That's crazy.
Did that for 3 months. How I got that rate, I have no idea. But it was unbelievable. I'd like to get the rate right now.
So you had 1,400 cages housing more than 3,000 breeders.
Into one room.
That's crazy.
You produce over. If you figure all of them, and I had more than 10,000 dragons.
Yeah, you did.
I had to raise 2,500 as sellable. So I would have 1,200 a week, but I kept them for 2 weeks. And then I had to raise several thousand over a 12-month period to have them as breeders.
Right.
And we had, it was a complete, I had a hibernation room that we kept it was kept dark and kept at 60 degrees year round. And we'd move a group into the room and a group out of the room. And there was room in the room for 4 groups. So there was because every 2 weeks for 8 groups, and it would cycle through. We kept the breeding room 12 hours of daylight because that's what March is, the equinox. And that's when they breed. They don't breed in the summer when it's 16 hours. They breed in the spring, and it's daylight controlled. So we kept the temperature and that cycle. Then we had an incubation room. And originally I built an incubator out of a chest of drawers. We had a room that was 10 by 20 with 200 eggs in it. Mm-hmm. And we would get anywhere from 900 to 1,400 hatchlings a week. And at the end, I was getting, again, this other company selling their dragons for $12, and I'm selling mine for $28. And I'm still selling 1,200 a week.
That's awesome.
So, I was able to do it, but I couldn't raise the price anymore, and the cost of everything went up. My cost of lettuce in the summer of 22 went from $17 a case to 45 to 75. And
why didn't you go find a farmer, somewhere else or
no, you don't know how much I was using. I tried to mung farmers and everybody else, and I would wipe them out in a week. They wouldn't have any more lettuce.
All right.
A case held 24 head.
Right. Romaine, right?
I was going through 30 cases twice a week. I was going through 60 cases a week. Okay. I was going through 2,000 pounds of chicken mash, which I fed to my reptiworm larva, my black soldier fly larva, every week. A ton of chicken mash to feed 1 million black soldier flies. I had over 1 million dubia roaches. I had over 1 million superworms.
I didn't know that you did your live food as well. That's crazy.
Well, it would be too costly to buy it.
Yeah, that's true.
I raised the hatchlings preferred baby crickets, so I bought eggs from Armstrong's and hatched them.
So do you miss your bearded dragon business?
Yeah, completely. Again, I had a lot of different morphs. I had a lot of things that, my son, who's got a degree in computer science, developed a database for tracking. We had barcode scanners in everything. Uh-huh. All the clutches of eggs were immediately barcoded and labeled. All the cages with the breeders were barcoded and labeled. I could go back and all this was put in a database. I could go back in a history and tell you how many eggs any female laid, how many of the eggs were viable, what mate she was working with that season, whether he was viable or not. Because sometimes you get a male that's shooting duds and it's not fertilizing the eggs.
Sure.
So no, it was a wonderful piece of software, and it gave us a huge advantage on manipulating them. But the cost went up, and then for some reason, the city of Chico switched what it put in its water for a bactericide.
Right.
And it killed my insect colonies.
Ooh.
Because you got to give them water. I mean, they
Right.
collect, all of them. The black soldier flies, the superworms, the dubia, all collapsed in 4 weeks.
Wow.
To nothing. I mean, I could raise superworms till they were 3 weeks old and they would all just die.
Huh.
And stuff. And so we started giving them bottled water, but then that just became too expensive.
Yeah.
Because we were going through tons of water, I mean, and I was the first one to use water crystals. So, we had no problem with products. I made the damn product. I made the total bites for the crickets. I made the insect foods. I had no problem with the foods for them. We traced it to the water supply.
Wow. Why didn't you get an RO unit?
Pardon?
Why didn't you get an RO unit?
By the time we realized that the colonies had collapsed so bad that it would have been really hard to bring them back up.
Yeah.
Remember, dubia roaches are like bearded dragons. It takes 5 months to raise them to breeding size.
Yeah.
And they give live birth to a clutch of 30 every month. I mean, and it's a damn insect. I mean, it's not like the cockroach is laying you 1,000 eggs a week. So, to build a colony up that size, it would have taken, again, another couple of years.
Yeah, that's
the insects were always somewhat of a problem because you were raising them right on the cusp. You had to have a certain temperature. They were much harder than the bearded dragons.
Right.
You had to have a certain temperature. You had to give them a lot of water. You had to do this for them. You had to do that for them. I had I had 3 different managers in my roach colony. I'd get it built up and then I'd give it over to somebody to run it. They would collapse it. Then I personally would build it back up because I knew what the hell I was doing and what the fine detail to pay attention to. I mean, that's the hard part with employees sometimes. You train them, and then, I had employees, again, with the hatchling bearded dragons. So, I would train them that you had to use a little pint hand sprayer to give them water when they're babies, because they're used to drinking the dew that drips off of leaves. So you do it real slow, and it makes a splash either on the side of the cage or in the water bowl, and they'll see it and go over and be curious, and they'll drink it, or it'll run off the top of their forehead down to their nose, and they'll lick it. So I'd come into the room, and there'd be 2 employees talking to each other, spraying the whole cage like they were watering grass. I said, guys, you got to direct it to the animal. You're trying to get the animal to water. The walnut shell in this cage is not going to grow. And that was, it was always a constant battle. Well, why don't you set up a sprinkler system? Because it'll fill the cage with an inch of water in 15 minutes. That's not what I need. I don't need to drown the animals.
Hey, in all the years that you're in the animal business, what was the most interesting animal you think you've ever brought in?
That's hard. I've had pangolins.
Really?
Out of Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, scaly anteaters.
Right.
They were neat. I've had slow lorises out of Malaysia. They're a primitive primate. I've had kinkajous. I've had tarsiers. There's a primate that I got in out of Africa. I can't remember what its name is now. The protuberances on the spine go through the skin, and it's a protective mechanism. When somebody goes to eat it, it hurts their mouth. And I had a customer come in. I had it in a cage, a nice parrot cage, because it was a climbing primate, little primitive primate. And I had a description of where it came from and a little map that was colored in and a full description of it. And, you know, and I'm a wise ass. So the person asked me, says, well, what exactly is this animal? So I explained it to him again, sort of parroting what I had already written out. And he goes, well, I still don't understand. What is it? So I said, well, it's sort of like a primitive monkey. And he goes, well, I still don't understand. I said, well, it's probably easier to tell you what it's not. And he goes, okay, what isn't it? I said, it's not a train. He didn't like the answer.
He didn't buy it.
Yeah, but it was just one of those things. It's like, you know, I'm sorry if you're, you know, there's a T-shirt I have. It says, I can explain it to you, but I can't help you understand it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the truth. You know, George Carlin, the comedian, made a great statement. If 50% of the people are above average, take it from there. It's a little bit cynical, but it's true.
Paul, that's probably a good stopping point because we're probably at about an hour and a half right now. So we've covered a lot of bases. I think I've covered the outline here pretty well. And I just want to thank you for coming on and telling us your...
It's been fun, Gary. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been. It's great seeing you. You look great, by the way. My God. And there's so many people left that could talk about the mammal business, you know, because not many people, when I got into it, nobody was dealing mammals. You know, I mean, it was unheard of to import reptiles pretty much.
I mean, that's one of the reasons where I got into the computer stuff. When I sold Terrafauna, I thought the reptile business was doomed. You know, because there was no breeding. Remember, I sold before breeding became popular.
Right.
And if you don't have live animals, you're not going to sell product.
That's true.
And breeding had come up by '94. I mean, I went to the San Diego Reptile Show. And after that show, did Nature Zone said, shit, it's back.
All right, Paul, thank you again so much. And I'm sure we'll talk soon, okay?
Yep, take care.
Take care.